Most unlikely of villains, smooths of brain and for pause. Does it talk? Does it know how? Does it boggle? Does it meow? In the lair of the cerebral, and I'll show him so much more. We'll leave your brains at the
Welcome back to Cerebrivore. Today we've got a Steam panel to talk about a game that I don't know that any of us really played. So this will be fun. I'm, as always, Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. We have one of the core members of Cerebrivore, one of the founding members of this podcast, Karl Rodriguez, the Gemologist Presents, and we have Daniel Norton of the Bandits Keep Media Empire. How are you gentlemen doing today?
We're doing all right.
I'm doing well.
Excellent. And I'm happy to have you both here. This is a game, so I'll start here. This is a game I had as a kid. Now, the only books I've ever had for this are the core game set, the box set, and the Q manual. I've never owned any of the modules. I've since kind of looked at the modules really quickly. I haven't ever read any of them, so if anybody wants to run this game at any point, I'm happy to play it. But I've actually go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Go for it.
I'm going to throw this off base right from the beginning because part of the reason that I even found this game was because of the modules. Though I have also never played it in the modules, but it's one of the things people talk about. Like if you look on any forums where they talk about spy games, they refer back to these modules as being very good.
Yeah, and this is a game I would love to play if somebody wants to run one. Go ahead, Karl.
Yeah, I think I've never run it or played it either, so I guess that's a common theme. Although Amy and I have talked about it, my wife Amy and I have talked about it. We just actually have just over the span of a few weeks rewatched Bond from Dr. No to No Time to Die, so nice. It's a pretty good perspective there, and it looks like it's a really good. Well, it does seem like it's the most part like a dual game, right? Like a one GM, one player.
Well,
although like it looks like you could have the 007 and a sidekick or two 007s, kind of like Spy Who Loved Me type of thing, right?
Actually, interestingly enough, and why don't we hit this now before we get into history? It's not designed that way. You might think that, but actually, the way the modules are designed, they're written, and it's really smart how they wrote it. But now, some of the modules are written for 1 or 2 players. Some of the modules are written for 1 to 4 players. But the way they're written is to have 4 novice players or 2 medium, whatever the medium level is called,
agent
players, or 1 008 player. They're scaled specifically for those skill levels, so you don't mix skill levels. And what it does is it adds extra adversaries if you have extra players. So, like if there's an encounter where a mugger pops out and you're playing a single 00 agent, then a single mugger might pop out. Where if you have 4 novice players, 4 muggers might pop out. It's kind of weird, and it doesn't always do that. But it's interesting the way it actually does intentionally try to scale that.
Well, even in the which I don't know. I was going to ask if either of you guys have tried the solo game because I was going to play it first because the book itself has a solo game in the back, and then you can also run it for somebody. I love that. I love that. Like the idea is you read this book, you get the rules, then you run through a solo adventure, then you can run that solo adventure for someone else. That's like your first way of playing. And it does the same thing. It says if you have multiple players, use rookies or agents or 1 00.
Right.
Yeah. That's really cool. That's a really cool design. I think several of the latest starter sets, like the Call of Cthulhu starter set, the RuneQuest starter set, do that as well, where they suggest you play the solo adventure that's incorporated or that's part of the starter set, and then go out and run it for other people, which is, I think it's kind of a cool concept.
Yeah, right. And it's interesting. This came out in 1983.
83, yeah.
It's the same year as the Mincer Basic set, which also includes kind of a choose your own adventure, starting adventure in there, a basic adventure in there. So it's not necessarily a copy of that because they came out at the same time. So let me hit just a real quick history of this game. Obviously, this game is an espionage-based game. It's percentile based. It was designed to emulate. They got the license for James Bond. It's a mix of the books and the movies. Spectre and Blofeld are not in here because of the lawsuit that was happening at the time, but they replaced Spectre with Terra, which actually it's pretty intelligent and pretty neat the way they create a different agency to replace Spectre in here. I think the Terran agency is kind of neat the way they did that, but they only had the license for 4 years, and there's quite a bit of material for this out there for that 4 years. It was well supported. It was very well liked. It outsold the other espionage games at the time. Unfortunately, the license was lost, and doing a little bit of research, nobody ever Eon Productions pulled the license, and they just didn't offer it to renew, from what I can tell, because Victory Games, this was a great seller, and they wanted to keep going, but they weren't allowed to.
And did Eon ever give a reason?
No, and they never gave it to anybody else either, which is weird. We've never had another James Bond tabletop role-playing game since this, which is kind of weird.
87. I mean, I don't know. Were they having the disputes with Timothy Dalton? I think they're having other lawsuits at the time. There is like legal disputes with Timothy Dalton and stuff like that. During his tenure. Yeah, I don't know. It's probably. I feel like it has something to do with probably Eon being in a lot of litigation at the time. So like, just pull it. We don't want any flack from anything, and
it could be that.
I wonder too. Like that time period, right? Was that during the end of like AD&D, like Satanic Panic, or is that earlier than that? I don't really know when that was happening because I wasn't affected by it. But I wonder if like they didn't want to be in role playing games.
Yeah,
maybe.
I don't know. Well, I mean, the Bond genre, the Bond genre has other issues that were probably
but they weren't issues at the time, right? And I don't know that we need to get in that on this podcast.
It's just interesting, or they could have just pulled it because they pulled it, right? I mean, who knows? Because also remember that Avalon Hill was probably having trouble during that period too, and Avalon Hill owned the game, so could be they couldn't have paid for it. I mean, there's lots of deals.
Yeah,
we can. That's the next story before Jason's going to find the original writers of the game and get them.
In the interviews with them, they've said they don't know why it was pulled.
Oh,
actually, I've looked at it. But so one other thing I want to hit really quickly, and then we'll kind of throw out with you guys, is one interesting thing about this game is it may not be the origin of some of these concepts, but the way it puts concepts together is it really is a more modern game, and it's predecessor of a lot more modern games.
Yeah, there's a lot of modern concepts I kind of noticed as I was glancing through here.
So I'm going to read a quick excerpt here, not very long, but in the very beginning of the book, it has a note for experienced role players, and this is really interesting. The James Bond 007 game is not like most role-playing games available today. Those games are designed to make the GM all-powerful and give the NPCs a much greater advantage over the player characters. And then it goes, this game is designed in the favor of the players. After all, what good is being James Bond if the game says you will fail rather than succeed? And this is really interesting because so many of these mechanics in here are built around player success. There's a sixth sense mechanic, a sixth sense skill that where if the player doesn't know there's a threat to them, the GM is supposed to roll to see if their sixth sense is activated. When you do a stealth roll in this game, we'll talk about quality ratings probably, but unless you get the very lowest quality rating, you automatically succeed in your stealth check. If you get the very lowest, it ends up being a pose check. Players have a chance to if they're being fired on and they haven't fired all their shots that combat round, they automatically get a chance to fire and interrupt the enemy before they get shot, which is really interesting. You have hero points that let you adjust the quality ratings of your opponent's rolls or your rolls to make you succeed better or to lessen the effects of their rolls. And even though some of the big bads have survival points, the equivalent of hero points, they cannot modify their own rolls. With the GM can't modify the NPC's rolls. All they can do is lessen the effect of the hero's rolls against those NPCs, why they're called survival points, but they can't use them to increase the damage effect, increase the effect against the heroes. So the game is stacked to the heroes, which is, again, for the time, really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Was it? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess I was a kid when playing games back then. I never thought that the game was stacked against the players, because we just played with the idea that the players are the heroes. But I can understand if you just look mechanic wise that, this is it's almost like this thing that we talked about in general before, where it's like this idea of creating rules to make people force people, I'm going to use the word force, be better GMs. Like a good GM shouldn't do that, right? Like they should give the players opportunity. They should do these things, but it's not in the rules, right? If your rules is written, if you read some of these older books, like OD&D, which I run, I mean, you could totally, red dragon in the room, you're dead, very easily. But should you do that? No, this game kind of puts rules into place so that you can't do it. So it's probably a good teaching game in a way.
It is. Although the first thing I'll bring up and we'll throw out for what we're going to do, folks, we're not going to go really in depth in the mechanics of these games. You can find them out there. We were looking; it's still fairly cheap on the used market. Of course, your only real option is to go to eBay or somewhere and buy used copies, but it's still fairly cheap. I think we all would recommend you go out and buy it.
Before I have a question, maybe Jason, because you know a little more of the history. So what I have, because I bought this again, because ultimately I bought it because we started talking about it. But I bought the box set, and it's called the basic game. Was there an advanced game? I didn't see anything.
No, okay. There were some other supplements like that, but really all you need for this is the basic book. You don't even need the box set. If you buy the base book, that gives you everything you need. There are supplements like with additional villains. There was a Game Master thing that had like Game Master screen. It had like stand-ups and a grid to put down for
I have that.
And things like that. But no, all you need is the base book. I mean, I think the Q manual's kind of a something you definitely want.
I mean, there ranges in prices, but I'm looking at eBay right now, and you can get the book itself as low as $10. Buy it now with $6 shipping, and box sets as low as like $25, $10 shipping, so $35-$40 depending on condition.
And I guess this is a good point to throw out there that there is a retro clone of this game out there called Classified. Classified pretty much copies this game incredibly accurately. Like Classified is this game system. There are minor modifications, but it really is the same system, obviously with James Bond stripped out of it, the IP stripped out. But if you want to see what this game is like and you don't want to buy you don't want to go buy an old copy of James Bond, pick up Classified because it really is the exact same game system.
Cool.
So I think my first thing I want to bring up, though, because we've all kind of read through the rules and looked at the rules. It's very obviously an 80s game because the rule book is not set up very well. There's no index, and it's hard to look things up because what they do in this is on the left-hand side of the page, they'll have the rules, and then in the margin, on the right-hand margin, they have GM tips. And there are a lot of rules in the GM tips. And trying to find things is a real pain in the butt. So that's kind of a negative. I hate to say that, but it is.
Well, I was going to say, too, that so I got in my box set because I just bought it together, the GM screen and the standees. And I'll tell you what, I would not want to run this without the GM screen because the GM screen it's just full of charts. And I think you need that to run this game. It's not necessarily a bad thing that's full of charts, but you need that GM screen. So I agree with you there. It's hard to find the stuff.
I think charts are an important thing that we will talk about, although they do put the main chart, the multiplication table and all that, on all the player sheets. They're on the character sheets.
Well, so they do, but they don't put they
don't put the quality rating thing.
The quality rating, which is like the most important. Because if you would just look at that character sheet, you'd be like, "Oh, I have 180% chance of hitting," but that's not actually true because the way it works. I know we're not getting into all the mechanics, but yeah,
right. But it is interesting because it is percentile based, but because the way they do it with the ease rating and the quality rating, you really have a range of 0-1 to 300, right? And what that does is expands it out and gives you a wider range of results. But it's so intelligent the way they built this because with the ease rating and the quality factors, most of your modifiers in this game, honestly, are like 1 to 3. They're not.
Yeah, and they as far as I can understand, as far as I remember, I didn't reread the whole book, but almost all the modifiers, if not all of them, are to the ease rating, right? So really, you're just using that one slider, which I really like. It's kind of, I mean, it's not at all like this, but in a sense, it's kind of like the Marvel superheroes. We've got the chart. We just move back and forth in the columns.
Yeah, it's really elegant design. That's why I think people should, it's well worth checking out. And like say, if you don't pick this up, pick up Classified.
Yeah, I'm going to go get that. Do you know if there's any adventures for Classified? Not to throw us in a different direction.
There's at least one out there. I haven't looked at it for a little while, but I know there's at least one. Yeah.
Because I really want to run this. I do. I'll say right off that when I started reading it, I was like, this is very interesting and innovative. And I'm on the record as being a super top secret fan. But this is very cool system. And I really like it a lot. It is on the read anyways.
Right. Karl, what were your impressions after reading this?
No, I like a lot of the concepts like you had said, right? So it does have some, I would say some things, even the names for some of the things too, right? Like hero points, right? It's a concept that is introduced in a lot of games later. Point buy system for character creation, right? I mean, Champions did that too. Might have been the first incarnations of Champions contemporary with that, but it's also like a superhero game, right? I mean, in a way, right? Right. So more customization from the player point of view as opposed to just randomness. Right. So in the character creation, no hit points, so wound level, right, is another important concept, I think, to give it more of that sort of a cinematic and heroic feel. So I mean, that was my impression.
And on that note, scarring, right? If you get hurt a certain amount, you get permanent scars.
Yeah, we'll talk about scarring and we'll talk about fame here. I don't want to steal Karl's thunder here. The one thing though, hero points, you mentioned hero points. Hero points in this are much closer to the Benny, and they almost recommend like a Benny economy for Savage Worlds, where you're continually giving people hero points because you want them to use hero points during the game. Right. And it talks about how if your characters always have 10 to 20 hero points, they're going to use them to do cinematic things during the game, and simulate the movies, which is, again, for 83, it really early for ideas like that.
Yeah. Well, again, it's supposed to be, it's kind of more of a player facing GM, the GM is like the sort of arbitrator of what's going on, not the judge, right? So I think it's really it's a unique concept, I think, for the time. They did put a lot, like we were talking, they did put out a lot of information, a lot of supplements, there's a lot of support for it in that 4 years, like you said. So
and Daniel mentioned charts. Just again, we're not going super deep in all this, but not only there are a couple main charts you need to play the game, but one of the cool things about this, when you drop down in the game master section of the book, there are a ton of charts for coming up with NPCs and encounters and adventure creation and all kinds of really cool charts in there. Like, as OSR guys, we all love charts, right? And we love random charts and things like that. And this game really scratches that itch. It's got.
Well, what's interesting about that is I didn't read through the whole GM section because I kind of got to the end of the rules and then stopped reading it and put it on the shelf for a while. But I was looking at that yesterday, and the random encounter chart is so interesting because it doesn't create. It's not like three thugs. I mean, some of them are just combatants, but they have like descriptions. It could be like rival spy, love interest, whatever. And there's like these little like stories of what they could be with different levels of it. So it's like it's not just an encounter means fight something. It's an encounter means something happens, which I think is a really cool concept and again more of a modern concept.
Yeah, it's really a shame this game was stopped after 4 years because there's so much cool stuff here. But I think maybe we'll get into we're going to talk about a couple of the concepts here that were innovative at the time and are still really neat. And I know the chases jumped out to Daniel. So I'm going to throw it to Daniel to talk about chases for a second.
Okay, cool. So I really like chases. First of all, I think that chases are one of those things, and maybe it's right or wrong, that people think aren't done well in a lot of systems or they don't exist. If you dig deep enough, you find cool chase mechanics. Like Cthulhu has a pretty interesting one. And interestingly enough, so does 5e. But I really like this one. It uses, again, kind of what I think is a fairly modern concept where it uses what I'll call zones, almost like RCRPG, right? You don't have, you're close, you're far, you're near, whatever they call it, I have to look at it. But, and you start off the chase by doing what I think is pretty unique. And I think it's the only thing in the game that uses this, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. It uses a bidding mechanic. So I'm going to have to get a little bit into the rules so this makes sense. So when you do any task in this game, there's an ease factor based on how difficult the task is. Well, it can be from, I think, half to 10. Right. The average is most things are 5, right? In the chase, though, what you do is you bid starting at 7. And what you want to do is think about what you're going to do. So you're James Bond, you're being chased across the rooftops. You're going to say, I'm going to jump across this rooftop or whatever. Or I'm going to jump, not across the rooftop because I'm James Bond. I'm going to jump down one story and smash through a window, right? Now, you're thinking that. So you're like, I'm going to evade whatever it is. The other person thinks of what they're going to do. So you go, I have a high evasion, so I'm going to bid 4. So you can bid as low as you like. The lower the ease factor, the more difficult the task. Whoever bids the lowest, basically, because you go back and forth, gets to choose who goes first, and everybody uses that ease factor. So if you know you're really good at something and they're not, you could say, you go first, and you can make them do their move first, and they might actually screw up, which is pretty cool. But of course, you can go first. And I really love that bidding. I love that back and forth because I'm a fan of mini games. And when you roll, and if you succeed or you don't, then you get further away from the person or they get closer to you until you either get away or not. There's like rules, I'm not going to get into it, but there's rules like depending on the vehicles you're using. It's very vehicle centric, really. It's like Aston Martins or whatever have certain bonuses, and if you fail you can have mishaps like crash the car or do all kinds of other stuff. And it's all built into what is like 6 pages of rules, which I think is really neat. It's just a very, very simple system. It's abstracted, and actually it says very specifically in here, you could put something on the table for miniatures, but this is really meant as theater of the mind. So I like it because you could pull this system and put it into anything. You don't need minis, you don't need anything. It's a very simple system that allows you to basically do this in your head. You don't need to you just kind of describe what's going on, what's the terrain, what's around. And it even gives you the reasons. It's like, because we're not going to give you rules for chases through the jungle versus chases through a city versus chases on a highway. We're just going to give you these abstract rules, and the rest of it's just flavor, which I really love. I love that aspect of it.
And it's interesting. And again, this is a way of kind of a nod towards the players, but everything that happens when you're whatever range, say medium range, everything's medium range. It says, for the purpose of the chase, when you're at medium range, your handguns are shooting at medium range and rifles are shooting at medium range. Even though they're different medium ranges, we're going to make it all medium range during the chase, just for ease of use and for that. But really, that ends up favoring the players, because chances are they're going to have handguns anyway, right? But that simplifications like that are just so smart, and they let you do special maneuvers. They give you ideas of all these special maneuvers in the chase, like double back, quick turns, and for like Daniel was saying, and with the modifiers. So it's not, they don't just leave you hanging. Like Daniel said, these 6 pages are they give you plenty to work with.
Yeah, there's even a section where this is more GM side, but where you can put obstacles, and there's like a list of them, and what the how that would modify it. So you could say, okay, well, I'm gonna put a drunk party goers crossing the street as you're riding your mopeds through the crowded Paris streets, and we're gonna have to both avoid those in order to be able to move past this thing. So it's pretty cool, which I think is also in Cthulhu, something like that. But I love that idea of like adding obstacles and stuff really simply and more abstractly, so you can use it anywhere. Yeah.
And the way it does it for the vehicles, the damage to the vehicles is sorry, Karl, I'll throw this to you here a sec. The way it does the vehicles are basically the same way it does it to people. And the idea is a mishap or something during the chase is just going to degrade your vehicle a little some.
Yeah. Right. And make it harder
really
to do.
Nice.
And you can do one final thing I'll say before Karl goes. This feels very James Bond. There's like a red line, I think it's called red line limit. So if you get in like a crappy vehicle, you can only push it so far. And if you don't, then you have to make a special save, which, of course, if you're James Bond and you have a really high skill, it's worth it, right? So you can take that crappy old car and outrace, somebody in a better car, because you can push it beyond what it should be able to do, because you'll risk taking those rolls. And you can use hero points and everything else to make sure you don't crash.
Yeah, like the little bug Fiat car in from For Your Eyes Only, right? That's rolls down the I guess pecan tree grove or whatever. That's pretty funny. Yeah. But yeah, you're exactly right. And I think it definitely is it fits for the genre. There's like you can every single Bond film seems to have a foot chase, a car chase, a boat chase, right? Skiing is a big thing too, right? Ski chase. So you have all these different chases, especially the car chases. They always highlight the Aston Martin or the Lotus in the Moore era, etc. So that's pretty. The BMWs later on, but yeah, it's pretty cool how they do that, because you totally feel. I totally feel you need like a chase scene, whether it's Daniel Craig style parkouring like in Casino Royale, or the various chases from Sean Connery and Moore era, right? So.
Yeah, it pretty much says that in the book. It's like, it's not a James Bond adventure if there's not a chase. So here's the chases. Right. It's which I really love. I love how it, and again, I like how this doubles down into the James Bond, which I know we're going to talk about more at the end, I guess. But I really like that. I like that you could take this and go, I've seen Bond films. I've never played a role-playing game before, but I get this because it makes sense if you've seen the films.
Well, it makes it super accessible, right? Because you have people that never play role-playing games, but pretty much everybody out there has either seen a James Bond movie, or at least they're aware of the tropes. Right. So this is such an accessible property.
Well, and I think so if we look at Top Secret, which I really love, of course, if you look at Top Secret, you could make a mediocre agent. So you're like, I pick up Top Secret, I want to play James Bond. And you could go out there and make a character that's not going to be James Bond, right? Whereas this, you can literally make James Bond. You have that, which is great. So if you want to do that, you can definitely do it.
Maybe we should talk a little bit about the character creation, because I think that's actually one of the weaknesses of this game. Okay. It's point buy, which isn't a bad thing, but the way they do it, your characters, even a novice agent has 3,000 points to spend, and you spend points on everything from your height and your weight, your appearance to your, you name it. And now it's really interesting the way they build this together. Like your height and weight affects your fame. So really quickly, fame is the idea for the listeners. Fame is the idea of how recognizable your character is. So you notice how, like, whenever James Bond is undercover, and this is especially important in the Connery era, or the Moore era, where not all of them, but most of the enemy agents automatically know, oh, well, that's James Bond. Well, that's fame. And fame is, and you want to keep your fame low, because when your fame gets too high, it almost expects you to take a desk job at that point in this game. But things like your attributes and your height, your weight, all those kind of things affect your fame. And that's one of the places where the book is a little bit sexist, and female agents have a -40 to their fame, which is kind of silly.
Oh, do they? Yeah. Well, I mean, I could totally see that. Exactly. You're playing in a fantasy, right? But I wonder how true it might be in the espionage world. In the 80s, that it was less likely that you'd have a field agent. So I mean, whatever. I mean, I'm not saying that I would do that, but I'm just saying I could see why they might have done. Sometimes you see why people make decisions, even though when you look back at it, you're like, oh yeah, no, that's not good. Yeah, but I do like how you choose a character. Yeah, good. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like, for example, like the most points you need to spend on your physical aspect is the average, right? The average person, is about 5'10" to 5'11", 5'6", 5'7", and that you spend the most points, so you have the least amount of fame. So if you're the most inconspicuous, that costs you more, right? Which is pretty interesting. It fits in to me. Yeah. I don't know. I wonder why they do that. I wonder why they do 1,000, and like you said, classified kind of just reduces everything by a factor of 10. I just wonder why they went with 1,000.
I don't know. I don't get me wrong. I like when I look at the system. It's elegant. It's smart. I actually really like the results of it. I know as a kid when I had this book and looked at it, and you're looking at it, well, because of course we didn't want to make rookie agents. We want to make 00 agents, right? Yeah. And you look at that, you have 9,000 points to spend, and it's kind of overwhelming. Right. Well, that's true. I think you're right there, but I also like that they give you a roster of characters to play. Yeah. So you start off with pre-gens right in the book, and you can kind of see how they should be. Because I also have a question about something, which is good. I haven't looked at character generation in a while. I'm assuming you have, Jason. That's why. So like I was looking at the chases, and if you're doing a foot chase, you have to use evasion. Now, if I look at evasion here on my DM screen, I have strength plus dexterity divided by 2 plus skill level. Does it mean that but do you have to take the skill evasion in order to use that, or no? You can just straight. So if you don't have the skill, you still use that calculation, but your skill level is 0. Yeah. So you don't add any number in there, but you're always, but if you don't have a skill, you're always minus three to the, to these factors.
All right, so you can still do it. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
But it's not like
it's just harder. You have a lower multiplication.
Yeah. That makes it really hard. So you want to take evasion, because I've noticed that everybody automatically gets driving, right? So it's on the character sheet.
The automatic skills are interesting in here, but to go to Karl's point, it's a little bit harder, but if you're a high level agent, your characteristics are going to be really high. So you're still going to be, even if you don't have one of these skills, you're going to be very successful because your tributes are so high, right?
Yeah.
And you have hero points to spend to make yourself succeed anyway, which is really cool. But it's really weird, or it's interesting. So your initial skills are what? Driving and I think charisma. And then you have 3 things that are abilities or like skills, but you can't increase them down the road, which is weird. There's photography, there's connoisseur, and there's one other that's an ability.
It's on the character sheet right now to look at it.
Which is it's kind of weird.
First aid.
Everybody always has those, but you can't make them better as you
but that's because they're 20 though.
Yeah, there's
20 times 5 is 100. So you're like the middle always. Yeah. I do agree though. While you should be able to improve them, but at least you start off really high. But 20 is super high.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%. But it's interesting that your secret agent character has. I understand why they did it, but your basic skills, connoisseur makes sense, right? First aid makes sense. Photography, okay, but no fire combat, no combat skill. You get no combat training in secret agent school.
Maybe not. Well, you know what? Maybe they did that purposefully, because if you look at some of the notes I've read, again, I just kind of flip through the book, they pretty specifically talk about the idea that you really should not get in gunfights in this game, and that you should try to use hand-to-hand combat. But even looking at that, it's pretty deadly. I feel like this game is about talking. Again, making another comparison to like Call of Cthulhu, but in a different genre, where I think playing this game is a lot of what we'll call role play, right? Interaction with your character, talking to NPCs and figuring things out and solving things with a gunfight or a chase if necessary.
Yep.
I don't think that chases are always necessary, but I think that the game's built like that. And if you want to play a game where you're going in and just shooting things down, this is probably not the game unless you play Double O, which
100%. I agree with that. And you see that in here because like seduction is its own subset.
Yeah, really which is super interesting how they do it. You know what's funny about that too? And I just want to mention that I think it's pretty cool because it very specifically points out that if you're doing this seduction, which is on stages, which I think is super interesting, if the NPC wants to do it to the player character, they don't roll. They automatically can decide, I don't want to do this. I do want to do this, which I think is cool. It's giving, again, that's kind of a little bit more of a modern concept, right? It's like the player can say, no, this is not happening at any point during that, which I think is a pretty interesting thing for them to throw in there. Yeah. Because again, it's like you could see people being like, well, playing D&D, well, they cast this charmed person. Now all of a sudden you're their slave and this and that and all this, things people might have done. And they're preventing that here, going, no. If the player is uncomfortable, they could just say, we're not doing this, right. Which I like. Yeah.
Yeah, they break down this NPC interaction into persuasion. Yeah. So getting someone to do, just like, I need to borrow your car, whatever. Seduction, which we kind of mentioned just briefly here with Daniel, and then even interrogation, right? So that's all. There all seem to be an interrogation scene in a Bond film, right?
Yeah, right. All of that's in the Bond films. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I do like about the seduction too, I'll mention. Sorry to talk over you, is that it doesn't. Once you seduce somebody and they're enamored with you, you're not just like in control of them. That just gives you a bonus on your other things.
On your other things, yeah.
Yeah, so you can take the other the agent from the other side, whatever, and seduce them, by talking nice to them, whatever, by impressing them somehow, and then they're going to be enamored to you. So when you ask them to borrow their car, it's more likely, but it's still not 100%, which I also like. It just kind of ties in and builds a story.
Or maybe they're seducing you, like in the case of Anya Anasova and Spy Who Loved Me, right? So
exactly.
Yeah. Well, you always have a chance of failure in this game. If you roll 100, 00 when you percentile dice, you're going to fail.
That's kind of ironic. I wonder if that's purposeful.
No, maybe. Yeah,
maybe that's. Yeah.
But
I do
like that.
Actually,
there's always that chance, right?
Yeah, there's always a chance, right?
No, it's really interesting. You mentioned interrogation. So players interrogate villains' torture, which is a nice. No, I mean the book simply says that, which is interesting. Yeah.
It's genre, right?
Oh. Mm-hmm. This is one of the best when we talk about genre emulation and Top Secret. Top Secret has a lot of things to generate the spy or to emulate the spy genre. Does it really well, and this is like the next generation of games to do that, and it does it, maybe even a little bit better. But again, I love Top Secret. I know Daniel loves Top Secret. Yeah, but this game, I mean, you can see it at the pay. It just drips with genre emulation. And you wouldn't use this rules to do anything else. This isn't a game where you take these rules. I'm going to modify these to run a fantasy game. No, this game is built to run espionage.
I mean, you could run it. You could run it outside of James Bond, but you're still doing super spies, right? So you could do Bourne Identity or something like that. But
basically, you could do Bourne stuff or Mission Impossible.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
but it's definitely that. It's not, again, like Jason mentioned at the beginning, it's very player powerful. You're almost a superhero, so you're definitely like top level spy. It is made for, I think, smaller groups. I mean, that's what it is. Going back to my original thing, I got into this through the modules, is I was on a lot of Top Secret and other forums, and people were like, those modules are basically all raids. It's like if you pick up a TSR module, it's like it's 6 to 8 characters with machine guns going into a fort shooting people up. They were like, get these James Bond modules. They're much better for smaller groups where you really want to actually do spy stuff, even if you're running Top Secret. So I haven't read any of the modules, so I don't know how well they translate. But so many people referred to this game saying, well, some people said they actually liked it more than Top Secret. Blasphemy, but they on the Top Secret forum, but they basically said the modules are great. And I will point out, as much as they redid Top Secret recently, which I wasn't. I mean, I did the Kickstarter, I did all things. I didn't love it as much as the old Top Secret. I think I'd run this over the new Top Secret as well. I think it's actually for this type of genre. It really does have that single or couple small agent vibe. It does it, I think, really well with the really powerful, because you need that, right? You can't have a weak agent going by themselves. That would not be, you wouldn't last very long.
Right.
No, and the interesting thing of the modules, just really quickly, I'll throw it back to Karl, is what they've done. And again, I haven't read these, so if you want to run these, Karl or Daniel, I'm happy to be a player. But what they do is modules generally follow the movies, but they change, and they say they change things in the module specifically. So even if you're familiar with the movie, there's going to be a twist in there in the game. So you can watch the movie without spoiling the module, which is so smart, because people, they just saw, The Spy Who Loved Me, right? And you want to play that, and you can do that without, I don't even know if that's, but say From Russia with Love, that's one of the modules. I know that's a module.
Yeah.
If you love From Russia with Love, like JFK did, that was one of his favorite movies, then you can watch that movie, but you can still play the module and not be spoiled for it, right? Which is so smart. It's just so well done.
Yeah, that's actually one of, From Russia with Love is probably one of my favorite from the Connery era. Just because it's just like a spoiler. It's like an adventure on a train, right? I mean, to me that's the coolest thing, So it's like oh man, this is like, I wonder if they is the inspiration for horror on the Oriental Express, because they are on the Oriental Express, right? So that's pretty cool. But I think when I was reading it, and as we're talking here, because it was made in 83, right? So there's quite a few movies. The tail end of the more, and then Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and Daniel Craig. But I feel that you could run that type of stuff, right? With this game, you could still run. Tomorrow Never Dies, I think. And I think that'd be a great one. There's a lot of convolution, and it's very, very period appropriate, with how we think of how media controls everything, right? So, but is that right? Tomorrow Never? Yeah, it's right. Tomorrow Never. Yeah. So, but I mean, I feel like you could run that with this game. You could run the more the later Bonds after more using this game, right? So even though
I wonder. So I'm just looking at the skills as I'm thinking about this. Like, I think that one of my biggest issues with running, let's say Top Secret or any game like this that's written in 1980 in a modern sense, like, how do you translate things like the internet, right? Like, how do we use the skills for that? So I'm just looking. I mean, they do have electronics. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could use that skill, or you could just add a skill and use the same kind of.
Well, they have like the trick maneuver skill, the trick maneuver, right?
Right.
So you could figure that out. I mean, you could probably just even add it, right? Why not just add it?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I don't think it would be difficult. There's not that many skills here, they're super general. Yeah.
It's not like Bond is a good computer guy anyway. He always goes, Q, you do it. Q.
Right.
Q, you do it.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Q can do it. He'll figure it out. That's just like very in the Pierce Brosnan and Craig stuff. It's like, oh, Q, here's the files to decrypt. And then it happens, right? So type of thing.
Yeah. So one thing, so I beat up the book a little bit for its presentation as far as the layout, but as far as the writing of the book goes, putting aside the fact there's not the index and sometimes hard to look things up, the book definitely sucks you in. The writing's very good. It gets you in that world of James Bond. And the Q manual, the one supplement I mentioned, does this in spades. So the Q manual presents guns and gadgets and cars and planes and boats and all that kind of thing. And each individual item has a little Q evaluation where you have a paragraph from Q talking about that weapon or that car or whatever. Nice. And they talk about like how it was used in an adventure, or how like the Uzi is so reliable because, it jammed, but the agent used it to hit one of the bad guys on the head, and it unjammed it. And so he's able to keep firing. But it's so evocative, and you don't really need to, because really all you could just have a chart with all the stats, but they do such a good job in there. That's why now, of course, the Q manual is going to be all 80s centric because when the book came out. But it's one of those supplements. If you bought, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, if you bought nothing else, buy the basic book and the Q manual, and you're set.
Then you have
what you're saying is this Q manual that I see here on eBay, I should just put it in my cart right now. Is that what we're saying? You get me to buy
I really
again?
like the Q manual. I mean, I would, but it's up to you, obviously. But that's I really like the Q manual.
I think that's super interesting, right? And that is one of the problems with something that's older, right? Is like translating it to a modern. But I think if you know enough about modern things, then you can pull it off. Like I don't know anything about handguns, but I'm sure that if I looked at this and said, well, there's an equivalent, this gun would be equivalent to this gun, and then you can just use the same stats or close to it. I don't think you have to go too crazy.
Yeah,
100%. And it's easy enough to update the stuff in here. And really all you do is you take the equivalent of it today and you just use the stats. So you take the best card today, whatever the stats are for the best car in the Q manual, you just give that to the best car today, right?
Right.
And the same thing with the guns. So like the guns, and if you're like a gun nerd, and I don't say that derogatorily, but you look at these, like obviously like the Walther PPK isn't the best pistol by any means, James Bond preferred pistol, but it's one of the best pistols in the game because they want agents to use James Bond gun, right? So its stats are inflated much beyond what they should be. And the same thing with some other ones. So it's, it's what it is. But yeah, it would be super easy to update the equipment where it gets tough. And like I say, how hard is it to come up with, your iPhone or your Apple Watch or whatever and put it in a game? I mean, it's really easy for the GM to. Yeah,
I don't think that the technology itself. I think like how it's used, like skill wise. And again, this is one of the problems. Not problem, but that I found. Let's say a really skill heavy game like Call of Cthulhu. It's like how do you use the web browsing skill? Like if the game is heavy like that, a lot of times people just make it work, obviously. But like this is so simple. I mean, there's only a handful of skills here, and they're super like wide ranging, right? There's just driving, evasion, fire combat, gambling. Well, so you don't have to get super specific.
Yeah, and that's where looking at classified could be helpful because classified does update things up to
that's
modern.
That's cool.
Yeah, it although I haven't delved super deep, I'm looking at it now. Yeah, it doesn't add a computer skill per se. It's got cryptography. It's got the same skill list.
And I only say that because it's true that James Bond isn't like clacking away at the computer, but if you are playing with a group of players, there's always that one person that wants to be that person.
Well, you could probably use cryptography though, because that's what you're using the computer for. It's looking things up, breaking codes. You could probably use cryptography. Or
100%. Yeah.
Or see what does it say? Like electronics.
Yeah, I mean, it
depends on what you're trying to do.
Electronics says breaking into a computer system. There you go. Yeah.
Oh,
you'd use electronics. So there you go. It's there. They thought ahead. They thought ahead.
Yeah, in 1983, they knew all about it. The Mac hadn't even come out yet. But they
we did have computers in movies in the 80s.
Did we? I don't remember.
Sure, yeah. When did War Games come out? That might have been 85, but still.
Yeah. Well, it's contemporary, yeah.
I mean, War Games is super accurate to today's computers. So,
hey, could you do War Games with this? That might be a fun adventure to run.
Well, yeah, you could, right? Yeah. You could do like, because they have like the different tiers. You could do like rookie. Novices, right, and run like any sort of spy-ish genre. You could run that one with the kid from E.T. that takes place in San Antonio, right? What is that movie?
A Cloak and Dagger.
Cloak and Dagger. You could run Cloak and Dagger.
Yeah, with Dabney Coleman as well.
Dabney Coleman movie. Yeah,
as like that's his character right in the game.
Yeah. Yes. It's his dad and his character in the game.
Yeah, it is game.
Like, I highly recommend it. Yeah, Cloak and Dagger is a great movie.
Yeah.
So a couple other notes I had here. Yeah. We may want to talk.
Was it Henry Michael Thomas? Is that the name of it?
Yes, that's the kid's name. Yeah. Elliot from E.T.
Yep.
Yeah. So one thing I know Karl's mentioned this before. One thing I like that our good friend Eric Salzwedel over at the Omega 3D Chicken Coop won't like is, let's talk about combat just for a second. In combat in here, you do declare actions. But the way you declare them is the higher speed characters declare later on. So the faster you are, you get to see what other people do.
Other people are going to do.
Declare. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you go first.
Yeah. And then you go first. That's right.
Like X-Wing. Like X-Wing, you move. The slower people move first, and then you counter their moves if you have a faster speed. But then you get to attack first. So
Gaslight is like that as well. The miniatures game. The losing side moves first. Then the winning side moves, then shoots, then the losing side shoots. That's how Gaslight works. Yeah. So I like that a lot, actually, especially if you're going to actually like counter what people are doing. It's a kind of fun way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It's like Bond generally is always one step ahead, except, when it comes to dealing with Spectre. So, but, or Tarot. Sorry, Tarot.
Yeah,
and there are in this game too. But I don't know if this is something new to this game either, but it is the weakness thing.
Yeah,
it's also
I don't
kind of
know
a modern
if that started here.
Well, they had that in Champions, right? You pick I think they're called disadvantages, right?
Okay.
Like you're dependent, or you something like you allergic to kryptonite.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever.
Right. Well, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, but so the weakness thing is interesting. The weakness thing is optional. Again, it's very player facing, player focused. You can have the characters decide if they want a weakness or not, right? I think it totally fits in. I mean, Bond definitely has a weakness for women all throughout every single incarnation of Bond, right? So why not? Why not incorporate that trope and run with it, right? And there's other weaknesses you can have too, right?
Oh yeah, there's a whole list of them. And the nice thing in here is your weaknesses aren't just role playing opportunities. It's kind of like GURPS, where weaknesses give you extra generation points. So if you take a weakness, that gives you more points to put into skills and tributes, and how average you look, or whatever you want to do with it, right?
I do love the look. I was looking at that last night. That's so funny. It's like, so if you're like 6'6" and 250 pounds, like people are going to recognize you, which again totally makes sense. You can understand why they did it, even if
if you have metal teeth, right?
Right, exactly. But it's like, so and again, maybe today people wouldn't necessarily want that, because they'd be like, no, I want my character to look the way they want. I don't want a disadvantage because of that, because it's not fair, which is totally legit. But so like that's maybe of its time, but I still think I can understand why they would do it. Like I understand why the mechanic works, right? And that is kind of true. Like if you read a lot of, I don't know how true it is in real life, but if you read a lot of spy novels, that's a big deal, that they are actually kind of generally, they look average, they fit in.
Yes, you want to be inconspicuous, right?
You want to be the gray man, is the term often you'll see used. Yeah, definitely. It's just such a, kind of, as we round down to kind of final thoughts. It's such, we were going to round out with the idea of, could you run this today? But we've kind of already talked about that some, and I think you could.
I think you could.
It for the time, it's such an interesting game, and even today, it's such an interesting game, right? Because it does such a good job at genre emulation.
It does. I guess I have a question though, kind of unrelated to that. So one of my problems with running modern spy games is coming up with like how you would do it, because I think that maybe it's because I'm an adult now, but like when I was a kid, I did not mind having, running spy games, because I was thinking it wasn't really affecting me, right? And oftentimes the stuff that was going on, the books and stuff had happened already in the past, right? So, you're running Cold War, it's already happened, right? When you're running something these days, like when I picked up the new Top Secret, and they're talking about like, terrorists blowing up oil tankers going, it kind of, for me anyways, it was hard for me to think, do I really want to run that? Like, is that a little too close to reality for me living in these times? So I don't know, like, would you just run that? I mean, I'm clear, not making a judgment. Like, obviously some people would love to run that stuff. But is there other things you could do? Like, what would be like, if you look at, or do you just do the insane, crazy mega plot that James Bond has anyway? So it's like, well, I'm trying to collect all the, microchips in the world so I can do, like what would you do if you were running something like this, just off the top of your head, if you had an idea?
I would go that way, but go ahead, Karl. Let you go. That'll give me time.
No, I think it just depends on what you want to. I think you could do a little bit of both, right? Because like I would say the Brosnan, well, actually even Dalton onto Craig, it's more small scale, not big giant plots to destroy the world like the earlier ones, right? And everything, I mean, I guess maybe Goldfinger's not so much, but everyone else wants to destroy the world, or and recreate it in their own image, like in Moonraker, right? So, you could go big, and that would be really fun. And you could I would even suggest, Daniel, since we're all big fans, grew up in the '80s, why not just play back in that time? So you still have the Cold War going on. You have these big overblown crazy plots. It doesn't seem until like you get towards the end of Roger Moore, like Christopher Walken View to a Kill, that it gets more like angry and gritty and brutal, right? It is kind of more. It is in a way cheesy super spy sci-fi, right? Is when it is in the, except for maybe the exception of like From Russia with Love, right, which is a train story. But I mean, and then in the later ones, then you have the more gritty terrorist cell. And if you look, like these bad guys don't have giant weird bases, except for No Time to Die, but for the most part they don't have big elaborate bases. They're like hidden places in the world, as opposed to like a floating space station or a space station right. or a floating ship or whatever. But there you can if you want to play more modern, then it would be less conspicuous, more convoluted plots about taking over money or running a country, right, like they do. So it's just different, right? It's just different.
Right.
Yeah, I would run it in the 80s. To me, I think spies work best in that. I mean, even look at the modern movies today. modern Bond movies, modern Mission Impossible movies are almost about, the mole, somebody's gotten in the organization or this or that, or, it's all about the kind of corruption and all that. And I just think just as heroic fantasy, I think it's more fun to do the 80s thing. But interesting enough, I think one of the supplements I might have mentioned, I might not have mentioned, was a villains book. And in the villains book, one of the villains in there is just a serial killer.
Oh.
And so, they even acknowledge in there, like maybe you put somebody a lower stakes kind of
right.
villain.
You could do like Silence of the Lambs, right?
Yeah,
or
something like that.
Red Dragon hunting for a serial killer. So that's actually really good. So they really have built into the system, playing. While it says James Bond in the title, you really, as we're talking about it, you really could play like a lower level, type of stakes, right? It doesn't have to be world domination, world destroying stakes, but it could be, a group of agents, FBI agents or CIA agents tracking a serial killer, either domestic or internationally, right? That could be quite interesting.
Yeah, for some reason now I'm thinking of. Do you ever see it was redone? Pelham, taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. That's what I thought of when you're talking about the money, because that's actually a really interesting. Spoilers for that movie. Like it's not what you think it is, right?
Right. Yeah, I wonder could you do like heist flicks with this? You think? Like Ocean's 11 or, right? Because that's about. Interesting. Then you flip it, right? You're the super thieves, I guess.
Right. Case. Well, that's all the early Mission Impossibles, especially, all had that heist, sequence in there, and heists are great if you have a bigger party. So that's definitely one of the negatives to this. Even the adventures that came out, like usually 4 is the cap, like 4 novice agents or rookie agents, right? So this isn't, if you have a bigger group, this isn't a great game, but it's great for what, like the Karl and Amy want to play, or just 1-on-1 or 1-on-2. Like this is a great game for that. But yeah, if you were going to do like a heist kind of thing where you have multiple characters, a heist, if you do have a bigger group, a heist is definitely a way to get everybody involved. Because a lot of the scenarios, James Bond, chase, but the other thing is like gambling, right? Or seduction. Right. Well, but you're not going to have 4 people trying to seduce somebody, or 4 people, you could all be gambling, but really gambling is more of a 1-on-1 kind of thing. Right?
We're not playing the Hangover, right? So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you'd have to do it where a group was happy to just like kind of sit back and everybody take their own scene, if you will.
Yeah.
That's the only way you could pull that off, and then come together. Almost like things like Tales from the Loop suggest you do, like between like the major scenes, like each individual character has like a moment with their. So you could do one person gambles, one person seduces, one person hacks the computer, but the group would have to sit and wait for it. So it kind of depends on who you're playing with, how much time you have, and if that works. Yeah.
So you don't think you could play like Bond and a sidekick, like Bond and Leiter? You couldn't play something like that? You don't think that would work?
It would depend. It really, it's going to depend on the GM and the skill of the GM, and like Daniel said, because you're going to have to be able to switch that spotlight back and forth, and and all
it might be better to go ahead.
Is that Bond is so good? It'd be like playing like a D&D game where you have like a 6th or 7th level character and a 1st level character. Like they're just going to outshine the other character all the time.
Or a high level wizard and a high level fighter.
Right. Exactly.
Well, but maybe in contrast, you could use something like Spy Who Loved Me or Tomorrow Never Dies, where you have like an equal equal part. Like so, on a Soba. Right, like Barbara Bach's character or Michelle Yeoh's character, right? So that where someone's equal, and sometimes has to say Bond, right? Or even actually Madeline Swan actually is pretty damn good character. Has a lot of skills.
I think depending on the group. I mean, I'm not a huge proponent of balance, and we all play older games where balance aren't a big deal. But this game, I think, does kind of lend itself to the idea that your characters are going to be about the same power level. It really does kind of want you to do that.
It also says in multiple places that I was looking at that the person with the highest skill will always be the person that rolls. Yeah. So if you're in a group, then that 00 agent is almost always going to roll the dice. And I think that's when it becomes like you'd have to very specifically break people up so that wouldn't happen, which could be very fun. It would actually, I was just thinking now that I don't know how you'd exactly wrangle it, but this might be the kind of game too that you could play in a campaign with multiple people that aren't all playing at the same time. Where they're all spies and they're all doing different stuff, and you just have to keep the world moving in a certain direction. Right. Even opposing each other could be kind of an interesting way to do it, because you can do single player. Yeah.
So I guess the next step which won't be during this podcast, but is for somebody to step up to run this game and for us to run it. Or
yeah, I would run it. I'm gonna look at these modules. You like From Russia with Love is a favorite?
Oh, I don't know. That's one of my favorite from the Connery era. I don't know. I feel like I have like a.
Well, I only do Connery.
Oh, you don't do what?
Sean Connery is James Bond, Carl.
Yeah, there was no other.
Yeah,
I don't know. I actually, after rewatching the Craig, I kind of like the Craig. I like that's for another Cerebrivore, but I like the continuity and all the Craig. People don't like that, but I like that all the Craig movies are connected, right?
Well, there's continuity in the other ones too. It's much looser, but it is there. It even into the Roger Moore era.
I feel like they wanted. I definitely feel like the screenwriters and the directors, and even probably the original producers, wanted to do that, but there are issues, right? Like, I mean, one of my favorite is actually on Her Majesty's Secret Service, the George Lazenby, which and they had intended to have Connery do it, but he didn't want to do it. So, but that's to me that's it's incredible, juxtaposition to like what Connery was doing there before, and they kind of, it's definitely well worth watching from the quote unquote Connery era, right? It's George Lazenby, and just put, just in your mind, put Connery's face in front of there. And, yeah.
No, Lazenby does a great job there, and the other interesting thing.
That's a fantastic story. It's a fantastic story.
Oh, it is.
It's messed up, but
the other interesting thing. I know you like the Craig era, and a lot of people like the modern gritty Craig era. The Timothy Dalton movies were the predecessor to that.
Oh, I know.
They tried to get into that with Timothy Dalton. People kind of rejected it. Then we went into the whole era with Pierce Brosnan, and then we got back to gritty.
Yeah, Pierce Brosnan went back to like the more cheeky, campy, in my opinion. Although there's some that are a bit more serious than others, but the Timothy Dalton were getting pretty dark, man. That was getting
really dark. The second one is really dark. Not to spoil it for anybody, but
it's pretty.
Oh, is that the one where he goes basically off book and goes to take revenge? Okay, yeah.
He goes after a drug dealer.
I have not seen all the James Bond movies. I will confess.
Yeah,
so it's actually a pretty fun exercise. Amy and I did it. We decided to do it. Now we're going back and watching like Firefly, right? But that's another Cerebrivore.
Yeah, Firefly. There you go. Could you run Firefly in this? That'll be on the next.
In case of
but I
they're better. I think they're better games like Scum and Villainy, or even the Serenity or Firefly RPG. Right?
It's so interesting. They put out two different games. There's a Serenity RPG,
Cortex Classic, and Cortex Plus. Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Which is kind of interesting. But anyway, I think we probably reached the end of this discussion. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining me to talk about one of our favorite games that none of us have played.
Right. Next time. So we're going to promise another.
Yeah, that should be the next topic too. One of our favorite games. Oh, well, no,
that's a great topic, actually.
Well, I would say I will Coriolis, but Daniel's already run Coriolis.
But hopefully we'll be able to come back later in the year, folks.
Burning Wheel. There you go.
Yeah. Hopefully, Daniel. Hopefully, we'll bring in Arlen for that. Yeah. Yep. We'll be able to coordinate for Daniel to run From Russia with Love for us, and Carl and I can play through From Russia with Love. That would be great.
Or we can rotate around it.
Or I'll do what I normally do is I'm going to go on eBay and just find the cheapest of the modules.
That's fine.
Just buy that one.
I'm happy to play
Moonraker and Octopussy were always, I don't know. I think because I saw him with my dad and he was a big Bond fan, but I think that's why.
There's one here with Dr. No and the Q manual together for $25.
There you go.
There you go.
So we might do Dr. No. I'll look around.
So Dr. No, it'd be fun to do Dr. No because that's the first one, right?
Right. So
play them in order. Play them in order. No, but
there we go.
What's the difference between the one in there and the Dr. No in here? That's a question.
Well, I guess
Dr. No's in here.
Yeah, there's only one way to find out.
Yeah. The actual character, you mean, or the adventure?
The solo is Dr. No.
Yeah, the solo in the book is Dr. No. Yeah.
Oh, that would be interesting to find out.
Obviously, I'm sure the module's different.
Yeah. But we'd have to. So I guess our homework would be we'd have to all play that solo and then play the module.
Yeah.
And then we'll know. Cool. And then that'll be a third episode.
There we go. So that's what you have to look forward to, folks. Again, thank you guys for coming on. I really appreciate it. And
anytime.
So, folks, check out both Bandits Keep and The Geomologist Presents. They're great podcasts. if you have a chance to pick up James Bond 007 role-playing game, I think we all give it 2 thumbs up. And again, the classified role-playing games out there that's a retro clone that is the same system, just with the IP stripped out. But I think all it's left to say is be excellent to each other.
Broadcast, Cerebral podcast. Let's savor all the flavors from the sign of Capstrong. The all stars and pods past. Cerebral podcast. You're counting down your last as you admire them all. Something's growing teeth. Oh, seriously, in your brain. What I mean is this is shades of fake. From all I understand, now the Super Bowl is coming, and all that's left is the crying and the running. We can bring it, we can pile, we can above in any order. Just another ring of real tossers running for the point. Just a snap like a one. Can I stutter? Here and here. It's very splendid buzz. You can eat on a billion, and his customers never say it. It's savory, the flavor of the movies it created.